Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to discuss BPMs, Business Process Management area of Epicor, and what is new in the Epicor 10.1 version. BPMs is the module that allows you to automate processes to fit your particular business needs. I will show some of the differences that are new in Epicor 10.1 and a couple of examples of how those work. Come learn what's new in Epicor 10.1 BPMs. The following slides will illustrate the flow of the different types of BPMs, and several slides will show the differences between the new design elements in each type of BPM between 10.0.700.4 and 10.1.400.13. And the last 4 bullet points on this slide are some of the new items in version 10.1, which I will show in more detail for each of these items in the subsequent slides. This slide is from an Epicor resource and shows the flow of BPMs. Here we can see the pre-processing BPMs happen before the Epicor application server code, and post-processing BPMs and method directives happen after the application server code, and then the base processing BPMs for method directives happen at the same time and in place of the application server code. So it's recommended not to use base BPM method directives. Then there are 2 types of data directives. The in-transaction data directives happen after when the data transaction is about to be applied to the database. And then the standard data directives are executed after the post-processing and include all accumulated database changes passed through to them. Today's presentation will only show a couple of examples for the pre-processing method directives. So here we can see the new BPM design elements available in Epicor 10.1 for pre-processing method directives. In the callers area, we can see we have a new design element called invoke BO method, and that can be used to call a business object and a method to perform an action. In the setters area, we have 3 new design elements. There are 3 new different ways to set your data to a value using the fill table by query, the set argument / variable, and the update table by query options. This slide shows the differences that are available with the base processing method directives. We have the same difference in the callers area, that we include a new element called include BO method, and the same new design elements in the setters area that include the 3 new design elements as were in the pre-processing. However, we also have a new element for designing in the other category, and that is the raise exception element that was not included in version 10.0.700 in base processing method directives. In the post-processing method directives, we have the same 4 options that were available in pre-processing. Again, the invoke BO method, and then the 3 different setters: update by table query, fill table by query, and set argument variable. Once we're in the data directives, we have the in-transaction data directives. And here we have 2 new design elements: the enable a standard data directive and set the argument variable. And the only additional element for standard data directives is the set argument / variable. That was the only difference between what was in version 10.0.700 and 10.1. This slide shows the differences in the design area across BPMs. Throughout the different BPM types, there are new areas for variables shown down here, and method parameters, and the validation results. Although 10.0.704 did have validation, nothing was shown if the validation was successful. and 10.1 a success message is shown, or an error message if the validation failed. Next, I'll show the setup done for some of the new design elements when they are incorporated into a pre-processing BPM. First, we'll look at the fill table by query. To use the fill table by query design element, you really are likely going to incorporate a variable and an invoke BO method design elements also. So I'm covering an example with all three here. Anyone who has worked with BPMs is probably familiar with the condition element, and the first box here shows a summary of our condition for this particular BPM. We are going to make sure the customer city field has been changed from any value to any other value that makes our condition true. So we want to make sure to link from our true side to the next design element option. Unless we are really checking for something to be false, then you want to link from the false side of your condition to the next design element. You can have a link going from both the true and false side, or you could have it just from one or the other. If you don't have one from the false side, as in this example, then nothing happens if the condition is false. Only the action happens if the condition is true. The second box down here shows the summary of what is done in the fill table by query step. So you define a normal BAQ, in this case ours is called customer orders, and you can also use temp tables and ERP tables both in your query designer. You will not be able to test the results inside the designer. The target table is shown in the middle of the second box and can be a temp table or another table that you make available with a variable. In this case we made ours available with a variable. The configured portion on the right hand side here allows you to map fields between the target table and the query that you designed. The invoke BO method summary is shown in this box on the right hand side. Here you would choose which business object and method you're going to use to actually update a table that's filled by your query. So in this case we're using the UDO1 and the update extended method, and then you have a configured section which will allow you to map the different options needed for your business object and method. You can specify the parameters with that configured parameters option. And the bottom portion here shows how we defined our variable for our target table, the UD01 log records, and we used a table set as the type to be filled by our query. So this slide shows the example of what we're trying to do with our BPM. We can test it by bringing up a customer and changing the city from Lawrence to anything else, and then we show our results in a UD table by running a BAQ or a select query to see the results. So in this case we changed our customer's city from any to 123, and then we changed them from 123 back to Lawrence for this customer. So once we change the city and click save, all of the orders that are open are updated to that city in that customer area. Open orders were in our query. And then also the UD table is updated to show the results of the configured portion of the fill table by query using the invoke BO method to actually fill the table. Basically we're using the UDO1 table to track the customer, when the city was changed, the GUI ID, the change type, in this case customer city change, and additional information about the full change is shown in the character 1 field. I imagine you might put this on a dashboard or possibly see if you can send alerts, etc. Another example of a similar BPM might be to create one that works on the date change of sales orders. The second example is to use the update table by query. So to use the update table by query design element, you'll need to use a condition and an update table by query design element. Again, if you've worked with BPMs in the past, you're probably familiar with the condition. And in this case, we're setting up the condition that the UD01 key 4 field of the added row is equal to the constant value of customer city change expression. Again, we want to make sure to connect from the true side to our update table by query. And the other half can be left without a connector, which will just mean that nothing else is done. Nothing will happen if this condition is false. Second box shows the summary of what is done in the update table by query step. Again, you define a normal BAQ, and you can use temporary tables and ERP tables, but you will not be able to test your results inside the designer. Then you select which rows are going to be affected for your update, and then you select which table you want to update as the third element. In this case, ours is the TTUDO1 table, and then we again have a configured mapping that will allow you to map fields between the target table and the query you design. An additional step of setting up the relationships between the tables is required on this configured portion versus the previous configuration used in the fill by query type. Here are the results of our update table by query testing. To test the BPM, we need to meet the condition of the previous query, adding one or more new records to the UDO1 table with the key 4 field equal to customer city change. To do this, again, we need to do the same action as the previous BPM, since the previous BPM automatically added records to the UDO1 table when the city is changed on a customer record. Once we click Save, all the orders that are open are updated to that city, and a new record is written to the UDO1. Since that table did add records to the UDO1 table, our condition is now met for the second BPM, and that sets up the update table by query process. Now each row as it is added to the UDO1 table has been updated with the state from the new update table by query action, because we included the state in our second query, which was used for the update table by query option. Now we'll take a closer look and review the examples in E10.1. As time permits, we'll review one or both examples. So first we're going to take a look at the method directive that's going to use the 3 elements we discussed in the design area. We will use the fill table by query and the invoke BO method and the variable. So here again we see our condition. The customer city field has been changed from any to another. Our fill table by query, we can take a look at our query quickly. We call the customer orders. And we are linking the temporary table to the actual customer table and also to open orders. We need the actual customer table to get what the previous city was, and the temporary table will have what we're changing it to. And then the order header table, we have criteria on that the open order is equal to the true constant. So we're only looking for open orders to be updated with the city. And then we pick the fields to display, and then as I mentioned, there are no options for testing your query, so we just say OK here. So that was our query, and then this is our target table, which was a variable that we defined with UDO1 log records as a table set. And so that's our UDO1 log records for the UDO1 table, and then with our configured mapping. So if we open up the configured, we'll see that it shows the table name is the variable that we set, the target table, and this column of name shows all the different fields that are in that target table. And then on the right hand side here we have the binding column. So in the binding column you can click on the drop down list and see all the available fields that were in your query to be able to be mapped to a specific field in the UDO1 table. And then you also have the options for some other expressions. If you choose the expression option, you can create expressions to show in your field that you're mapping to. So here we just put in the current date and time by using a BPM function of now to string. And you can check syntax and use all the parameters and functions that are available on the left hand side. So once you have everything mapped how you need to, you can say OK, and that finishes your fill table by query portion of your workflow design elements. And then you can move on to your design element for invoking a business object method. And in this case, we're trying to update our UDO1 table with log information. So our business object method that we choose is the UDO1 and update extended method. UDO1 is the business object and update extended is the method. And then we choose the configured parameters to actually configure what we want to have in each of the parameters for the UDO1. So in the first one that's in and out, we're going to use the UDO1 log records variable. And in the continue processing on error, we set that as a Boolean to false. And rollback parent on child, we set that as a Boolean to true. And then the out parameters can be specified, but you don't need to specify them. So we did not in this case. So that's the basic setup for the fill table by query, and we've now enabled it, so we'll go ahead and save it, and then we'll go ahead and test it. So we'll test it by going to customer maintenance, and I have a customer already pulled up, and I'm going to just copy the city so that I can put it back. Easy enough. But right now I'm going to change the city to, I don't know, Easy City. And once we save it, we'll notice that it says retrieving data and retrieving data, etc. And so it went and updated any sales orders that were open, and it also updated our UDO1 table. I put our UDO1 table as a menu item so that we could review that. So I will search and see what's out there and select all, and then we'll look at it in list view. And here we can see it. Today's date, today's time, this customer, the GUID ID, and then the change type is customer city change, and then all the details that we put into a formula in our mapping, configured mapping, are shown here. We had some static text and then input fields in the static text. This order number was changed from Lawrence to Easy City for customer, and it should say Latu. And so it did that for every open order for that customer. Now we'll take a look at the second BPM, which will enable, and we'll look at the design. So again, we have a condition, and this time we're going to say if the UDO1 key field of an added row to the UDO1 table is equal to customer city change expression, then we want to update the query, update the table by a query. So again, we design a query. In this case, we call it customer state because we're going to be updating the UD table with the state. So we link the UD table to the customer by the company and customer number. Customer ID is equal to key 1. And then we display our fields: company, customer ID, and state. We don't have any conditions here, and we cannot test our BAQ, but here we can see the displayed fields that we used. We state which rows of the TT-UDO1 table that we want to be updated. So we only want added rows of the UDO1 table, which is our target table, with the configured mapping. And so we'll look at the configured mapping, and here we show Our target table again is the TTUDO1, and then we have to add relationships here where we didn't have to in our previous configured when we're doing an update table by query instead of a fill table by query. And in this case, we're only going to update the character 02 field in the UDO1 table, and we want to update it with our customer state field. So we can just choose that from our drop down box, but we have the same options again to use a specified expression or create a new variable or use one of the fields from the query, and we're using the state field from the query. And so we say OK, and we can exit. I didn't really make any changes, but we'll say yes anyway and save it. Now we can go ahead and test that option by changing our city back from easy city to Lawrence, and then we save it again. And so you can see it was updating there in the background, and we should be able to go into our UDO1 table and search again, and see now we have 14 where we only had 7 previously. And if we look at the list view, I must have not selected them all. Select them all and then look at our list view. So here we can see the same type of information that we did at 4:14 is from the first BPM, and now at 4:18 is starting from our second BPM. And we'll notice that evidently we moved the character 02, but that we have in character 02 for the last 7 records that were added once we enabled the other BPM, we have the state now showing in the character 02. So once we updated from Easy City to Lawrence for each sales order, we also added the state in character 02. So this concludes our presentation for today. It was an exciting day of learning about many of the new things you can do with BPMs and Epicor 10.1. We suggest you test some of these options out in your test or pilot environment while the information is fresh in your mind. Verify things work as you expect and add more options after you are comfortable with your initial BPMs that are set up. Thank you.